Twins take DNA test for fun, but when results come in, their doctor calls 911 immediately. The drive back home was tense, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them like a storm cloud ready to burst. Aaliyah sat in the back seat, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the image of Detective Harris's face when he mentioned the abduction case. Amara, sitting beside her, stared out the window, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. Their mother gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional hum of the car engine. When they finally pulled into the driveway, the house felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. The twins followed their mother inside, the air heavy with unspoken questions. Without a word, they all headed straight to the attic. The place where it had all begun. The attic was just as they'd left it. Boxes stacked haphazardly, photo albums strewn across the floor, and the faint scent of dust and old memories lingering in the air. Aaliyah immediately went to the corner where they'd found the DNA kit, her eyes scanning the area for the journals they'd discovered earlier. Amara joined her, and together they began sifting through the stacks of papers and keepsakes. "Here," Amara said, pulling out a worn, leather-bound journal from beneath a pile of yellowed letters. This was one of Grandma's. She always kept it locked, remember? I found the key in her jewelry box last week. Aaliyah took the journal, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. The handwriting was elegant but faded, the ink slightly smudged in places. The entries were dated, some going back decades. As she skimmed the pages, her heart began to race. There were mentions of a secret their grandmother had carried, something she'd vowed to take to her grave. But the details were vague, written in riddles and half-truths. "What does it say?" Amara asked, peering over her sister's shoulder. "I'm not sure," Aaliyah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it sounds like Grandma was hiding something big, something she couldn't tell anyone." Their mother, who had been quietly standing by the attic window, finally spoke. "Let me see that." She took the journal from Aaliyah, her eyes scanning the pages. As she read, her face grew pale, and she sank onto an old wooden trunk. "Oh my God," she murmured. "I think I know what this is about." The twins exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding. "What is it, Mom?" Amara asked. Their mother took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she held the journal. "Your grandmother, she wasn't just a homemaker. She had a life before she married your grandfather, a life she never talked about. I always thought it was because she wanted to leave the past behind. But now, I think it was more than that." Aaliyah's mind raced. "What are you saying? That Grandma was involved in something illegal?" Their mother hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I don't know the full story, but there were rumors. When I was a teenager, I overheard her arguing with your grandfather. She was crying, saying something about a mistake she'd made years ago. He told her to let it go, that no one would ever find out. I didn't understand it at the time, but now, I think it might be connected to this case." The room fell silent as the gravity of her words sank in. Amara broke the silence first. "So, what do we do now? Do we give the journals to Detective Harris?" Their mother looked torn, her eyes filled with conflict. "I don't know. If we do, it could destroy her legacy. But if we don't, we might never know the truth." Aaliyah stepped forward, her voice firm. "We have to turn them in. If Grandma was involved in something like this, we need to know. And if she wasn't, then the truth will clear her name." Their mother nodded reluctantly, tears welling in her eyes. "You're right. We can't keep this buried anymore." The next morning, they returned to the police station, the journals tucked securely in a bag. Detective Harris met them at the entrance, his expression a mix of relief and curiosity. "You found something?" he asked. "We did," Aaliyah said, handing him the bag. "These are my grandmother's journals. We think they might have answers." Harris took the bag, his eyes narrowing as he glanced inside. "This could be a breakthrough. Thank you for bringing them in. I'll have my team go through them right away." As they left the station, the weight of uncertainty still hung over them. The drive home was quieter this time, each of them lost in their thoughts. Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change forever. Amara, usually the more optimistic of the two, stared out the window, her mind replaying the cryptic entries in the journal. Their mother's grip on the steering wheel was less tense, but her knuckles were still pale, her jaw clenched as if bracing for what was to come. When they arrived home, the house felt even more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. They gathered in the living room, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. "What if it's worse than we think?" Amara finally asked, her voice trembling. "We'll face it together," their mother said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Whatever it is, we'll get through it." Aliyah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead, imagining the worst-case scenarios. What if their grandmother had been involved in something criminal? What if the truth shattered their family's reputation? And what if Detective Harris uncovered something that implicated them in ways they couldn't yet imagine? The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, the phone rang. It was Detective Harris. "We've found something," he said, his tone serious. "You need to come back to the station." The drive to the station was even more tense than before. None of them spoke, the air thick with dread. When they arrived, Harris led them to a small, dimly lit room. On the table were the journals, now marked with sticky notes and highlighted passages. "Your grandmother's journals contain references to a kidnapping that took place over 40 years ago," Harris began, his voice steady but grave. "It seems she was involved, but not in the way you might think. She wasn't the perpetrator, she was a witness, and she was protecting someone." Aliyah's heart skipped a beat. "Protecting who?" Harris hesitated, then looked directly at their mother. "Your father." The room seemed to spin as the words sank in. Their mother's face went pale, and she sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "No, that can't be true. He wouldn't." "I'm sorry," Harris said softly, "but the evidence is clear. Your father was involved in the abduction, and your grandmother knew about it. She kept it hidden all these years to protect him, and to protect your family." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "So, what happens now?" "We'll need to investigate further," Harris said. "But I wanted you to hear it from me first. This is going to be difficult, but you deserve to know the truth." As they left the station, the weight of the revelation felt even heavier than before. Their grandmother's secret had finally come to light. But at what cost? The drive home was silent, each of them grappling with the enormity of what they'd learned. When they arrived home, the house felt different again, no longer holding its breath, but instead exhaling the truth that had been buried for decades. They sat together in the living room, the journals now a symbol of both loss and revelation. "We'll get through this," their mother said finally, her voice breaking. "No matter what, we'll face it together." Aliyah and Amara nodded, their bond as sisters stronger than ever. The road ahead would be difficult, but they knew one thing for certain: the truth, no matter how painful, was better than living in the shadow of a lie. As they left the station, the twins felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, fear, and a lingering sense of unease. They had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth, but they knew the journey was far from over. Whatever secrets their grandmother had buried, they were about to come to light, and there was no telling how it would change their lives. Over the next few days, the family waited anxiously for news. The media had caught wind of the story, and reporters camped outside their house, shouting questions every time they stepped outside. Aliyah and Amara stayed indoors, avoiding the chaos as much as they could. Their mother, meanwhile, spent hours on the phone with relatives, trying to piece together fragments of their family's past. Finally, Detective Harris called. "We've found something," he said, his voice grave. "Can you come to the station?" When they arrived, Harris led them to a private room. The journals spread out on the table. "Your grandmother's writings confirm a lot of what we suspected," he began. "She was involved in a kidnapping ring in the late 1980s. It was a small operation, but it left a trail of victims. One of those victims was a child whose DNA matches yours." The room spun as the words hit them like a punch to the gut. "So, what does that mean for us?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. Harris sighed. "It means you're not who you thought you were. The child who was taken, she was your biological mother. Your grandmother was part of the group that abducted her. When the operation fell apart, she took the child and raised her as her own. That child was your mother." Their mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, that can't be true. My mother would never." "I'm sorry," Harris said gently, "but the evidence is clear. Your mother, your real mother, was a victim. Your grandmother kept this secret for decades, but now it's out." Aaliyah felt tears streaming down her face, her mind reeling. Everything she thought she knew about her family was a lie. Amara reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly, as if to anchor herself in the midst of the chaos. "What happens now?" their mother asked, her voice barely audible. "We'll need to conduct further investigations," Harris replied. "But for now, you should prepare yourselves. This is going to be a long and difficult process." As they left the station, the weight of the truth settled over them like a heavy blanket. Their family's darkest secret had finally come to light, and there was no going back. But amidst the pain and confusion, there was also a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild their lives on a foundation of truth, no matter how painful it might be. The journey ahead would be hard, but they would face it together, as a family. And in time, they would find a way to heal. The days that followed were a mix of quiet reflection and restless searching. Aaliyah and Amara found themselves drawn back to their grandmother's journals, as if the answers to their questions might suddenly leap off the pages. Each entry felt like a piece of a puzzle, but the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. Detective Harris had assured them that the investigation was ongoing, but the trail of their biological father had gone cold once again. The twins couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Something their grandmother had taken to her grave. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old photographs, Aaliyah stumbled upon a faded Polaroid. It was a picture of their grandmother standing in front of her house, holding two infants wrapped in blankets. The date scrawled on the back read October 12, 1998. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. "Amara, look at this," she said, her voice trembling. Amara hurried over, her eyes widening as she took in the image. "That's us," she whispered. "But why would Grandma take a picture of us like this? It's like she was documenting something." The twins sat in silence for a moment, staring at the photograph. The image was haunting, their grandmother's expression unreadable. Aaliyah flipped the photo over again, her fingers tracing the date. "October 12th, 1998, she murmured. "That's just a few weeks after we were born. Why would she take a picture of us so soon? And why keep it hidden all these years?" Amara frowned, her mind racing. Maybe it's not just about us. Maybe there's something else in the picture. Something we're not seeing. She grabbed a magnifying glass from the desk and held it over the photo, scanning every detail. "Wait, look at the background," she said, her voice rising with excitement. "There's someone standing in the window of the house. It's too blurry to make out who it is, but what if it's our biological father?" Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat. "Do you think Grandma knew who he was? Maybe she was protecting him, or maybe she was hiding him from us." Their mother, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "Girls, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Aaliyah handed her the photograph, explaining what they had discovered. Her mother's face paled as she studied the image. This changes everything," she said softly. "If there's even a chance that your father is still out there, we need to find him." The next morning, they returned to the police station with the photograph in hand. Detective Harris examined it closely, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This be a breakthrough," he said. "We'll enhance the image and see if we can identify the person in the window. In the meantime, I'll send a team to your grandmother's old house. If there's any evidence there, we'll find it." As the investigation deepened, the twins found themselves grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. The possibility of meeting their biological father was both thrilling and terrifying. What if he didn't want anything to do with them? What if he was just as complicit in their grandmother's crimes as she had been? The questions swirled in their minds, keeping them awake at night. A week later, Detective Harris called with an update. "We've identified the man in the photograph," he said. "His name is Marcus Reed. He was a known associate of your grandmother's during the time of the kidnappings. We're tracking him down now, but it's not going to be easy. He's been off the grid for years." The twins exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding. Marcus Reed. The name felt foreign yet strangely familiar, as if it had been buried in their memories all along. "What do we do now?" Aaliyah asked. "You wait," Harris replied, "and you prepare yourselves. If we find him, it's going to open up a whole new chapter in this story. One that might be even harder to face than what you've already been through." As they hung up the phone, the twins sat in silence, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. But despite the fear and uncertainty, they knew one thing for certain. They were ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the porch, the twins sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The weight of their grandmother's sacrifice and the revelations about their biological father still lingered. But there was a newfound sense of purpose that kept them grounded. They had come so far, and yet, they knew their journey was far from over. A few days later, Detective Harris called again. This time, his voice carried a mix of urgency and excitement. "We've found something big," he said. "We've identified a location that might be connected to the network your father was involved in. It's an old warehouse about 200 miles from here. We're planning a raid, but I wanted to give you a heads up. This could be the break we've been waiting for." Aaliyah and Amara exchanged a glance, their hearts racing. "Can we come?" Aaliyah asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Harris hesitated. "It's not standard procedure," he said, "but given your connection to the case, I'll see what I can do. Just be prepared. This could get dangerous." Their mother, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "If they're going, I'm going too," she said firmly. "We're in this together, remember?" The twins nodded, grateful for her unwavering support. Over the next few days, they prepared themselves mentally and emotionally for what lay ahead. They knew this could be the moment they'd been waiting for. The moment they might finally get answers. The day of the raid arrived, and the family drove to the location with Detective Harris. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a stark, imposing structure surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted fences. As law enforcement moved in, the twins and their mother waited in a safe zone nearby, their nerves on edge. Minutes felt like hours as they watched from a distance, the sound of shouting and the occasional bark of orders echoing through the air. Finally, Harris returned, his expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "We found something," he said, leading them inside. The warehouse was dimly lit, filled with rows of dusty crates and old machinery. But in the back, hidden behind a false wall, was a room that made their blood run cold. It was filled with files, photographs, and documents, evidence of a network far more extensive than anyone had imagined. As they sifted through the materials, Aaliyah's eyes landed on a familiar face in one of the photographs. "That's him," she whispered, pointing to a man who bore a striking resemblance to the man they'd seen in their grandmother's old photo. "That's our father." Amara leaned in closer, her breath catching in her throat. "And look," she said, pointing to another photo. "There are other kids here. Do you think?" Harris nodded grimly. "It's possible. This network was involved in trafficking. Children, adults, even entire families. Your father might have been trying to protect you by leaving you with your grandmother. But we'll need to dig deeper to know for sure." The revelation was overwhelming, but it also gave the twins a renewed sense of determination. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for all the others who had been caught in this web of darkness. Over the next few weeks, they worked closely with law enforcement, helping to identify other victims and piece together the full scope of the network. As the investigation progressed, they began to hear stories of other families who had been torn apart, of children who had been taken and never seen again. It was heartbreaking, but it also fueled their resolve. They started a foundation in their grandmother's name, dedicated to helping victims of trafficking and supporting families who had been affected by similar crimes. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Amara turned to Aaliyah. "Do you think we'll ever find him?" she asked quietly, echoing the question she had asked months before. Aaliyah sighed, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. "I don't know," she admitted, "but even if we don't, we've already made a difference. We've helped others, and we've honored Grandma's memory. That's what matters." Their mother, sitting nearby, smiled softly. "You've done more than that," she said. "You've shown incredible strength and courage. Your grandmother would be so proud of you, and so am I." The twins felt a warmth spread through them, a sense of belonging and purpose that no DNA test or birth certificate could ever take away. As the months passed, the twins began to find a new sense of peace. They knew their journey wasn't over. There were still questions to answer, still mysteries to unravel, but they also knew they had the strength to face whatever came next. Together, they had weathered the storm, and they had come out stronger on the other side. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Aaliyah turned to Amara. "Do you think Grandma would be proud of us?" she asked. Amara smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "I think she would," she said. "She gave us a chance at life, and we're making the most of it. That's all she ever wanted for us." Their mother, sitting between them, reached out and took their hands. "She would be so proud," she said softly. "And so am I. You've faced something that would have broken a lot of people, but you've come out stronger. That's what matters." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the twins felt a sense of closure, not just for the past, but for the future. They knew their story wasn't over, but they also knew they had the love and support to face whatever came next. And in the end, that was all that mattered.